Hey, hey. Welcome everybody to Miss Glow's Kitchen, where there's sugar, spice, and everything nice, where we slice, dice, and entice, using everything we can, from peppers to allspice. What's up, my people? Y'all know what time it is? See y'all in the kitchen. Apple stuffed pork chops are on the menu today. And here's what we need to make those pork chops. We need 1 tablespoon of chopped onions. All right, you can dice it if you want to, if you don't want them too big. 1/4 cup of butter, which is a 1/2 stick. 3 cups of bread cubes, soft bread cubes. So I am going to use a sourdough bread today. You can use any kind of bread you want to use. 2 cups of finely chopped apples. I used Honey Delicious apples. You can use any kind of apples you want to use. 1/4 cup of finely chopped celery. 2 teaspoons of minced fresh parsley. So make sure your parsley is fresh. You can use the dried parsley if that's all you have, but I really prefer the fresh in this recipe. 3/4 of a teaspoon of seasoned salt. Use any kind of seasoned salt you want. 6 boneless loin chops. I actually used 2. All right, here's how I store my parsley when not in use. I wash it, wrap it, and put it in the fridge. It lasts a little bit longer. All right, back to the recipe. 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. You can use white pepper or a red pepper, crushed red pepper. Your choice here. I prefer black pepper. And some oil for frying. Now y'all know what I always say. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. So hey, let's get to it. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to get our bread cubes together. So I want to make sure we have our stuffing ready for those chops. So as I said, I'm using a sourdough bread. It's okay if you use another kind of bread. So you just want to chop it into cubes. Now, you don't have to do these too small. So you don't want to make them like breadcrumbs. You want to really leave them in the size of cubes. And I know they sell bread cubes in bags in the store, normally around the holiday season, but sometimes they'll have them. But those cubes are so hard, those bread cubes, so it just might be better if you make your own. All right, on to the apple. We are going to cut our apple around the core. Okay, around the core. But you want to make sure you are getting 2 cups of apples. Now, 2 cups of apples, that is for 6 pork chops. So I'm going to cut up some apples, but I'm only doing 2 chops today because it's only 2 people eating, so I'm not going to do 6 of them. I try to cut them around. You do not have to pare these apples, so don't cut the skin off. It's really not necessary. All right, so as fine as we're going to chop them, you don't have to worry about that. So, all right, and as I said before, any kind of apple. So if you want to use some apple, a Granny Smith, or some apple with a green skin, is okay. I prefer to use in this recipe a rather sweet apple, so that's why I use the Honey Delicious. But if you want a more, might I say, a savory apple, then you could use like a Granny Smith or some other apple in the store. But this one works for me. It actually tastes good, so. All right, so we're going to get these cut up, and then we will move on. And so when we get to this point, you can see that I have finely chopped them. They do not have to be even pieces. So if you have some of those smaller pieces, some bigger pieces, that's fine. So don't worry about perfection with this recipe, right? Okay, so now we'll move on to the celery. So we want to finely chop the celery as well. And so remember, this is going to be a 1/4 cup. 1/4 cup of celery, okay? Now, if you're really a celery lover, I'll tell you, you can chop these. Because a dice is smaller than a chop, so you can chop them a little bigger. Now, I wouldn't recommend that, but hey, your kitchen, your rules. I always say that. So if you decide to chop, it's perfectly fine. But for me, I'm going to dice them. Watch your fingers with that knife. when you're chopping, so careful in the kitchen. Alright, if you haven't hit that like or subscribe button, please do so now. Hit that like, that subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications so you know when I put up a new video. And don't forget to leave a comment. Thank you, I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Alright, back to the recipe. Alright, we're going to take that knife. And if you have like a little food processor or something and you want to use that, that's fine. I just like to chop things with my knives. I don't know why. Cooking is a little therapeutic for me, so I love it. So I just chop with a knife. But if you're in a hurry and you want to make these very quickly, they're boneless, so they cook very, very quickly. Now, the other thing, to keep in mind with those chops is they don't have a bone in it. Now, when you have a bone in meat, it usually imparts more flavor in it. So because we're using boneless chops, we have to make sure that we have our stuffing and our seasonings to the max. You have to make sure. You gotta make sure. Alright, so it's a tablespoon of chopped onions if you prefer. Once again, at this point, if you prefer to finely chop or dice these onions, that is fine. So you can make them smaller if you like. It's really, really, really up to you. So this is going into a stuffing, if you will, a homemade stuffing. So we're making from scratch our stuffing to go into the pork chops. So check that out. Yes, 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 check that out. All right, so that's about as fine as we'll do these onions, and then we'll move on. All right, so moving on to the parsley, we need 2 teaspoons of minced parsley. All right, so we're going to cut those stems off, as much of that stem as we can without cutting into our actual parsley and wasting it. And so again, as I stated in the beginning, when listing the ingredients, if all you have is dried parsley, go ahead and use the dried parsley. It'll work, but the fresh parsley is a little better in this recipe. Now, I'm all for dried ingredients all the time. You watch my channel, then you know that. But every once in a while, I will make a recipe and I will tell you that perhaps, but the parsley is pretty cheap anyway. It's like 3 bunches for 99 cents or something usually. But who knows, with the pandemic, the price may have gone up. Wow. The price may have gone up in some areas. Well, it hasn't where I live, but. All right, so see, you chop it and then you keep running that knife through it like that. All of us don't have food processors, and some of us, like me, I don't really like to use them. So there we go. So I'll put 2 heaping teaspoons. All right, so into a pan goes the butter. All right, at this point, I'll tell you I like to cook with butter. But if all you have is margarine, use that. It'll still work. So there are some recipes I will strongly suggest that you only use butter in that recipe, but this is not one of them. That's actually fine, okay? We want to melt this butter, but don't brown it. Like, don't almost burn it. So you can see I'm putting this in before I even melt the butter all the way. But this is going to cook quickly. The reason why is because most of these we've finely chopped. All right, these take the longest. Now I would say the celery, but you don't need to cook the celery that much for this recipe. You don't need to. So otherwise I would have said to soften the celery before we do the onions, but that's really, really not necessary. All right, so it's on a low heat. That's what I was trying to show you. Really couldn't see it that well, but it's on a very low heat. Now, let me tell you this while we're cooking. Let me tell you this really quickly. If you have noticed some of my recent videos, you do see that my stove is black. It's another stove. These are some of my earlier videos, but what happened is, due to copyright issues with the music, I had to take a lot of my videos down. So now that I am putting them back up, it's sometimes you'll see the countertop, the stove, and the floor will be a little bit different. So yeah, that's the reason why. All right, so if you chopped your onions a little bit bigger, then you want to make sure you cook your onions until they are translucent, until you can almost see through them. But don't burn them. Don't scorch them like around the edges. Don't. And butter will. If you're not very careful with butter, it'll burn a little bit because it'll turn brown. And brown butter is good for some recipes, but not this one. All right, if you see that your butter is turning a little bit brown, then put a little oil in it, just a little vegetable oil, about a teaspoon of it, and that will balance it out and keep it from turning so brown on you here. All right, so we're gonna jump over really quick to where we're adding the other ingredients. So into the pan, at this point goes our breadcrumbs. All right, so I didn't do all of the breadcrumbs because, as I said, this recipe is really for 6 chops and I'm only doing 2. So I am trying to cut it down so that I make only enough stuffing for the 2 chops. Now look at those apples. Now almost left them out in the air too long. What happens is they will oxidize or they will turn brown. And that happens when they are left out in the air too long. So you want to make sure that once you cut those apples up, that you are actually assembling your stuffing. Or either that, you want to put them off to the side in an airtight container, because it's the oxygen in the air that causes it to do that. So I almost left them too long, but I'm going to go ahead and do the dish anyway, just for demonstration purposes. All right, so in the lower right-hand corner, you can see the stuffing once it's done, what it looks like. All right, so not too long after you put the apples in and the parsley, a couple minutes, and your stuffing is ready. So now we're going to take our chops and we are going to make a pocket in the chops. Now you want to be careful that you are in the middle of that chop. You're in the center as far as vertical. So vertically you want to stay in the center, all right? And then horizontally you want to make sure that you're making that pocket as big as you can. So here I am using a fillet knife, and these knives are fairly sharp. So just make sure that whatever knife you're using, it's rather sharp, okay? Because if you use a dull knife here, it's very likely, not necessarily so, but very likely that you will tear your pork chop up. So you don't want to do that. Then we're not going to have stuffed pork chops. We're going to have a mess on our hands. All right, so again, you saw me feeling inside of that one just to make sure that I made the pocket as big as I possibly can without cutting through that chop. So we want to make sure here that you stick your thumb or your finger in there, and if you still have enough of the meat left, then you want to cut your pocket a little bit bigger. And so take your time with it, just don't be in a hurry. All right, so you can see that I'm steadily feeling around in there. I'm trying to make sure. All right, got it. Look at that. And that is exactly what you want. It looks like a little boat. Got it. Now I'm going to season the inside of the chops. I'm going to put a little bit of seasoned salt. All right, you know how pork is. Pork is going to pick up whatever flavor you impart on it. So it's not like it has a darn flavor of its own. It doesn't really. So you've got to do heavy seasoning with it, but you don't want to over season. So you can see I'm putting a generous amount on each side, but make sure, if you know, sometimes when you get seasoned salt, it's a little salty, and other times it's not. So you want to make sure that you taste your seasoned salt before you salt your chops. So if you want to use a regular table salt or a sea salt, you can. It will most definitely work out. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. If you want to use onion powder, garlic powder, and put a little thyme on the outside of there, you can. It's a very giving recipe. So if you want to use some other seasonings, you very well can. So just think with this stuffing as if it's Thanksgiving and you're making an apple stuffing. Think like that, and then that'll give you some ideas as far as the flavor profiles you can use that'll actually work. All right, so I'm patting this seasoning in very well. So again, make sure you season the inside of this chop before you put the stuffing in there. All right, so these are boneless pork loin chops. And because of the fact that it doesn't have a bone, as I said before, it doesn't have a bone, then we have to make sure that we have the maximum amount of flavor we can get, because we don't have that bone to help us out with the flavoring. Bones always impart a little more flavor in your meat. All right, I'm going to press that stuffing in there. Yep, get it all in that pocket. And don't overstuff your chops, so. And you can do this part with your fingers, so you don't necessarily have to use a fork or a spoon to do this. Yep. Push some more in there. Good. Very good. All right, so we have seasoned and stuffed chops ready to go. Check that out. All right, I have rather long toothpicks here, so if you got the shorter ones, trust me, they work, but we will take these out before serving for sure. So these toothpicks are just going to keep our chop closed until it bakes. Now, if you don't have toothpicks and you have twine, you can actually use that string. It'll work too. It'll actually work perfectly. You just want to make sure you close your pork chop. That's all. Keep your stuffing in there. And close it. A little bit more stuffing in that one, so I stuck one down the middle. All right, I know I got these little frilly toothpicks with this plastic on the end, but nevertheless, these are very, very delicious. So I'm going to take my kitchen scissors and I'm going to snip those toothpicks, but you cannot forget to take those out before serving. All right, so these are going to go into a 350-degree oven covered for 30 minutes. All right. And so after 30 minutes, you're going to uncover them and you're going to bake for another 30 minutes. And the reason why is because we have a rather thick chop here. But if your oven is like super hot and after 30 minutes you check these and these are done, then serve them. All right, so it may vary with your oven. It may very well vary. All right, so these are baked. So if you want to brown these on both sides before you put them in the oven, that is perfectly okay. All right, and so this is what it looks like once I assembled the plate. I served it with smashed potatoes, so cheesy smashed potatoes and a really buttery corn. All right, check that out. Y'all better go make this. These are really good. Really good. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time. For more great recipes, tips, and ideas, check out some of my other videos.